Something big is brewing for the Toronto Maple Leafs as a recent report has revealed some wild details about Bichette, indicating that the Jays were on the brink of trading him earlier on in this offseason, and that now it seems like all but inevitable that he gets moved this offseason. So, to break down what that crazy report was and discuss what it can mean going forward for the Toronto Blue Jays, as well as discuss another report revealing some details on Bo's future in Toronto. So, to break all that down in this episode of Jays Digest. Welcome in, everybody. I'm your host, Nick Gosse, and there's a lot to go over today. Obviously, the Blue Jays right now are playing some unbelievable baseball, quite frankly. They've won 6 in a row. They're not close to a wild card spot still. They're still 8.5 games or so back. But the biggest thing here is that at least the young guys are playing. They're getting some wins. They're getting acquainted to winning baseball. But the big question mark for the Toronto Blue Jays is still Bichette. You saw it in the Blair and Barker show after yesterday afternoon's game, and everyone is asking what's going to happen with Bichette, and a very interesting report came out. Let's just dive right into it. You can see this here. Blue Jays rumors. Bichette was on the trade block before the injury slammed that door. Now, this is very intriguing to me because obviously it seems like something big is brewing in Toronto surrounding Bichette, and quite frankly, we knew that earlier on in the season that Bichette was not playing very great baseball, and before he got injured, it seems like the Jays were shopping him around and potentially even looking to trade him. So up until that point, if we rewind a little bit to give some context here, Bichette had a wavering season up to this point, going from a consensus top 10 shortstop all the way to being the forefront of trade rumors just weeks before the deadline. We know that he came out and said he, quote, wouldn't be surprised at all, end quote, if he were traded at the deadline. Despite the uncertainty, we knew that obviously Bichette wasn't traded before the deadline. However, if you look and you rewind back a little bit, so Jeff Passon actually went on the Blair and Barker show and he revealed some very interesting details. He said he heard earlier this week, now this was a little bit ago, this wasn't obviously this current week, but I heard earlier this week that Bichette was involved in trade talks, but saying that they've completely closed the door because he got hurt. Now, this was a report that kind of went under the radar at the time because it wasn't the Blair and Barker show, but what this means is that the Jays, because up until this point, we weren't entirely convinced that the Jays were shopping or had shopped Bichette at any point during the past season, this season so far. But Jeff Passon came out and said, hey, Bichette and the Jays, they were shopping Bichette, and then he got injured, so you obviously weren't going to trade him when he was injured at his worst and his lowest value. But this lends credence to another report that came out very recently saying the Jays are shopping Bichette, and if you had any inkling about, hey, maybe that might not be legit because it was from Bob Nightingale, which we'll dive into here in a minute, this report from Jeff Passon, the most reliable MLB reporter, all but hints at the fact that, hey, the Jays are shopping Bichette, and they were not necessarily fully on the brink of trading him, but they were shopping him before he got injured. And of course, the injury shut all that down. That makes a ton of sense. But very intriguing to know that the Jays were actually shopping their star shortstop, meaning that when this offseason comes, they're clearly not going to be hesitant to let him go. And that probably is why Bichette said he wouldn't be surprised at all if he were traded at the deadline, because he had conversations with Ross Atkins in the past, earlier on in the season, probably about getting traded, considering that they were shopping him. And this is just a very interesting details. And it really points to the fact and lends credence to the fact that, hey, something big is brewing for the Toronto Blue Jays, because you look back at the season that Bichette has had, and it's been a very, very rough one. There's definitely no debating that. It's been a rough season for Bichette and the Jays in general. But the fact that they actually were shopping Bichette at this point earlier on before the deadline is very interesting. And we discussed that a trade at the deadline for Bichette probably would have made the most sense value-wise. We heard teams like the Cubs were interested. We heard teams like other teams around the MLB were very interested in Bichette. And we're saying, hey, were the Blue Jays actually shopping him? Were all these rumors made up? They were shopping him. And the fact that he got injured kept him on the Toronto Blue Jays. And then going forward, the question is, we know Ross Atkins came out and said that they want to compete in 2025. Competing involves, obviously, you're going to compete better if you have Bichette, but if you trade Bichette, you get a thumper in the lineup, a power hitter, and then you maybe go out and get a guy like Willy Adames, your team could look a lot better. And it's very, very interesting. And like the article says, it could have been a very realistic situation for the Jays to trade Bichette before the injury. The Jays are expected to only trade one of their rental players at the deadline. Again, this ultimately ended up being they ultimately ended up trading a lot of their rental players at the deadline. But when you this part of the article is before the trade deadline. But you look at this part and it's like, hey, Jeff Passon came out and said, well, Bo Bichette was being shopped. So it's very, very interesting. But looking into a recent report, which we covered a week ago, how the Jays were reportedly entertaining offers for Bo Bichette, and this is from Bob Nightingale. They're expected to entertain offers on Bo Bichette. We know this, who has no plans to stay in Toronto once he's a free agent after the 2025 season. And Bob Nightingale basically came out and said if he had to put him in order, he would go Bichette being traded 1, coming back with the same contract 2, and the least likely would be coming back with a deal and staying in Toronto. So at the time, we were saying, hey, this is Bob Nightingale. Take it with a grain of salt. But now you look back and you rewind a little bit to what Jeff Passon said just a while ago there, saying that, hey, Bo Bichette was actually getting shopped around before the trade deadline. Makes a hell of a lot more sense now as to why this thing is coming to fruition. And if you're Bo Bichette and you're saying, hey, the team wanted to trade me or was willing to trade me, or maybe he requested for a trade. We don't know the exact specifics and the exact parameters of it. But if that is the case, you're thinking, hey, if you're Bo Bichette, I want to go out anyway. I'm not going to stay. And we know that the attitude's been a bit weird. Now, whether or not, I think Bo Bichette ultimately at the end of the day just wants to win. But the fact that the Jays were shopping him, which makes sense because he hasn't been playing well, and they want to change the scenery here. If the Jays continue to play really good baseball and then they head into the offseason saying, hey, maybe if you add Bo Bichette back in, you can get a bit of a competitive team going. Or they might go on the other side of the spectrum and say, hey, we're winning without Bo Bichette. Maybe we trade him, add some power into our lineup, shake things up a little bit, because clearly this core of Bo Bichette, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., has not worked. They have not won a playoff game. So something needs to change. And ultimately, it seems like something is going to change, and that something big is brewing for the Toronto Blue Jays. And I just found it very interesting that that the Jays were shopping Bo Bichette before the trade deadline, and it lends credence. And I mean, the reason we're talking about it now is because these recent reports make all the more sense in the world and really give some insight on what the Jays and Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro at this point's real plan is heading into the offseason. Because I would not be surprised, like we discussed yesterday, if they do ultimately end up trading Bo Bichette. Now, whether you're going to get a big package or not is still up in the air. It's still in question. But I'm not going to say it's very unlikely the Jays keep Bo Bichette, but according to all these reports, it seems like that might be the way that things are going to go. But let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on that. We obviously know that Bo Bichette has had a very, very good career, a very good 2022. And again, he's been one of the premier shortstops in baseball, but that doesn't change the fact that he doesn't seem super happy here. He's having a very rough season this year. Obviously, was riddled with injuries a little bit and a bunch of different factors. But at the end of the day, if you're Bo Bichette and you're the Toronto Blue Jays and you guys you need to have an adult to adult conversation and say, hey, do you want to be here? If the answer is no, okay, we're going to start shopping you in the offseason while you still have a year on your deal left. Because if they drag this all the way to the trade deadline, things are going to get very, very interesting. And the Jays are trying to win next year. And if he requests a trade at the deadline, the value of Bo Bichette continues to decrease with each year that is left on his deal. As that starts to diminish, so does his value. So let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on that. It's going to be very interesting to keep up with this, and hopefully the Jays can win their 7th straight game tonight. And we'll see you guys later.